Today live March 9, 2021. World News Headlines. Republican donations surge despite corporate boycott after Capitol riots. New York City school segregation perpetuates racism, lawsuit contends. U.S. government to ship 18.5 million doses of COVID vaccine this week, White House says. Color-coded passage, why smugglers are tagging U.S.-bound migrants with wristbands. U.S. Supreme Court dismisses Trump immigration rule dispute. Minneapolis court seats first 2 jurors in trial over George Floyd's fatal arrest. Trump vows no more money for Renos, instead encouraging donations to his PAC. Royal family says it is saddened by claims in Meghan and Harry interview. Piers Morgan storms off Good Morning Britain after confrontation. Former Australian leader, Oprah interview strengthened argument to cut ties with monarchy. China's Xi calls on military to be prepared amid unstable security situation. Second Myanmar official dies after arrest, junta steps up media crackdown. U.S. Admiral calls for ground-based offensive weaponry in Western Pacific. Analysis: Lula's revival suits Bolsonaro, but Brazil 2022 is a different match. Russia's Sputnik V could be made in European Union after reported deals. Republican donations surge despite corporate boycott after Capitol riots. Right after the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, dozens of U.S. companies announced they would halt political donations to the 147 Republican lawmakers who voted to overturn Donald Trump's presidential election loss. 2 months later, there is little sign that the corporate revolt has done any real damage to Republican fundraising. If anything, the biggest backers of Trump's false election fraud narrative, such as Missouri Senator Josh Hawley and Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, have been rewarded with a flood of grassroots donations, more than offsetting the loss of corporate money. And contributions from both small donors and rich individuals looking to fight the Democratic agenda have poured into the party's fundraising apparatus. The boycott's limited impact underscores the diminishing role of corporate money in U.S. politics. Individual donations of $200 or less have made up a growing share of campaign money in recent years, while the share given by corporate America shrinks. That trend has accelerated with the rise of anti-establishment figures on both the right and left, such as Trump and progressive firebrand Bernie Sanders, a Vermont senator. Reuters examined contributions by more than 45 corporate donor committees that vowed to cut off the 147 Republicans, 8 senators and 139 members of the House of Representatives. The review found that the Political Action Committee's PACs gave about $5 million to the lawmakers during the 2019 to 2020 election cycle, or only about 1% of the money the lawmakers raised, according to Federal Election Commission, FEC, disclosures. By comparison, Republican fundraising operations supporting Senate and House candidates raked in a combined $15.8 million in January alone on the strength of small-dollar donations. These groups outraised their Democratic counterparts by more than $2 million that month, regulatory filings show. Interviews with Republican operatives, big money donors and fundraisers revealed little apprehension that corporate outrage over the January 6 Capitol riots would damage the party's fundraising for the 2022 congressional elections. Dan Eberhart, a major Republican fundraiser, said he had predicted for years that Trump's support would collapse. He believed the Capitol insurrection would be the tipping point. The data is the opposite, Eberhart said. You are seeing a hardening of support for Trump. I think there will be no shortage of money. Some Republicans and lobbyists believe that companies now backing away from the 147 lawmakers, or from political giving entirely, will reconsider that stance as their interests are threatened by the policies of a Democratic White House and Congress. The Democrats have become our best fundraisers, said Fred Zeidman, a Republican donor and fundraiser in Houston and chairman of investment bank Gordian Group. In a sign the corporate backlash may already be fading, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the nation's leading business lobby, said Friday that it has decided not to boycott the Republican lawmakers after discussions with more than 100 companies. Ashley Rich Stevenson, the chamber's political strategist, wrote in a memo to members that there is a meaningful difference between members who voted to overturn the election in some states and those who continue to engage in repeated action and undermine the legitimacy of our elections, such as trumpeting debunked conspiracy theories. Among the more than 45 corporate PACs examined by Reuters, the 5 that donated the most to federal candidates in the 2019 to 2020 election cycle are controlled by Atant, Comcast, Honeywell, Home Depot, and New York Life Insurance. Asked for comment on this story, Atant and Comcast declined and the others did not respond. Rising grassroots power. The National Republican Congressional Committee, NRCC, which supports House candidates, raised $7.5 million in January, outpacing its Democratic counterpart by about $500,000, FEC filings show. The Republican organization backing Senate candidates is chaired by Florida Senator Rick Scott, who voted after the Capitol riots to overturn Pennsylvania's Electoral College results. It collected more than $8.3 million in January, compared to $6.1 million received by its Democratic counterpart. That performance came despite the dearth of corporate contributions. 10 corporate PACs examined by Reuters slashed donations in January by more than 90% compared to the same month in 2017, right after the previous presidential election. All 10 of the PACs had sworn off donating to the 147 lawmakers. Asked about the corporate boycott, NRCC Chairman Tom Emmer, a Minnesota congressman, told Reuters that Republican House members don't answer to PACs. We answer to voters. The Senate Fundraising Committee did not respond to requests for comment. The waning importance of corporate money reflects a fundamental shift in fundraising over the past decade as the advent of online platforms such as ActBlue and WinRed made it easy to solicit donations from rank-and-file voters. Individual donations, small and large, accounted for two-thirds of funding for last year's elections. PACs made up only about 4%, down from 9% in 2016, according to the Nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics. PACs are typically controlled by corporations, industry groups, and labor groups. The biggest beneficiaries of rising small-dollar donations are often rabble-rousing politicians who vow to take on the Washington establishment. Nearly half of the $774 million Trump raised for the 2020 election came from donations of $200 or less. In 2012, Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney raised just 17% of his money that way. Sanders, a left-wing independent, refused to take corporate money and still raised hundreds of millions of dollars in small donations to support his 2016 and 2020 presidential elections. Unreal. Donations. On the night of the riots, lawmakers came out of hiding to return to the vandalized halls of the Capitol to vote on objections to the Electoral College results in Arizona and Pennsylvania. Certifying the winner is normally a formality, but the 147 Republican lawmakers unsuccessfully tried to overturn those states' results after Trump spent months falsely claiming that Democrats had stolen the election. Hawley, the Missouri senator, was pilloried by Republicans and Democrats for leading the coalition of Senate objectors. He took in $969,000 in donations in January, according to a February 1 memo posted on his website. That is 8 times some $120,000 in donations Hawley raised in the first quarter of 2020, regulatory filings show. The corporate PACs that have stopped donating account for a very small percentage of total fundraising that is more than offset by a huge surge in grassroots support, Hawley's pollster, Wes Anderson, wrote in the memo. Hawley's campaign did not respond to requests for comment. Greene, the freshman congresswoman who has come under fire for promoting baseless conspiracy theories, said in Twitter posts that she had netted $335,000 in contributions on February 2nd and 3rd alone. On February 4, the House of Representatives voted to strip Greene of 2 committee assignments over her remarks, including those in which she advocated violence against Democrats. Unreal. $175,000. Greene said in one Twitter post, "Democrats are attacking me because I'm one of you. We will never give up," she said in another. Greene's campaign did not respond to queries from Reuters. Eberhart, the Republican fundraiser, held 2 fundraising events for Hawley when he ran for the Senate in 2018. Eberhart said he called Hawley in mid-January, expecting him to sound beleaguered after taking widespread criticism over his role in trying to overturn the election. He sounded energized, at ease. He'd been receiving a huge amount of national support, Eberhart said. The grassroots are as charged up as ever. Silent wealthy donors. While some corporations have condemned the 147 Republicans and cut off contributions, mega-rich individual donors have largely stayed quiet since the Capitol riots. Reuters asked 15 of the largest Republican donors, many on Wall Street, if they are reconsidering political donations in the wake of the insurrection. 5. Kenneth Griffin, Steve Schwartzman, Richard Eline, Jeffrey Yess, Kelsey Warren, declined to comment. 9 others, Charles Schwab, Bernard Marcus, Laura Perlmutter, Joe Ricketts, Vince McMahon, Shirley Ryan, Ronnie Cameron, Paul Singer, and Warren Stevens, did not respond to queries. A spokesman for Jeffrey Sprecher, chief executive of exchange company ICE and husband of former U.S. Senate candidate Kelly Loeffler, said that ICE had suspended its PAC contributions indefinitely after January 6. The spokesman declined to comment further, including on Sprecher's donations as an individual. The brisk fundraising since the insurrection indicates that most Republican voters are comfortable with the party that has been remade in Trump's mold, says J. Miles Coleman, a nonpartisan analyst at the University of Virginia Center for Politics. The Republican Party? It's not going to go back to the party it was before Trump, he said. New York City school segregation perpetuates racism, lawsuit contends. A group of New York City students filed a sweeping lawsuit on Tuesday that accuses the United States' largest public school system of perpetuating racism via a flawed admissions process for selective programs that favors white students. The lawsuit in state court in Manhattan argues that a rigged system begins sorting children academically when they are as young as 4 years old, using criteria that disproportionately benefit more affluent, white students. As a result, minority students are often denied an opportunity to gain access to more selective programs, from elementary to high school, and are instead relegated to failing schools that exacerbate existing inequities, lawsuit contends. The complaint asks a judge to order the school system to eliminate its current admission screening process for intensely competitive selective programs, including gifted and talented programs and more academically rigorous middle and high schools. Racism thrives in New York City through its school system, Mark Rosenbaum of the pro bono law firm Public Counsel said at a news conference. He is one of several lawyers, including prominent civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump, representing the students. Rosenbaum described the case as the first lawsuit of its kind in the nation, to secure for the children of New York City the constitutional right to an anti-racist education as an integral part of a sound and basic education. The city's public school system is the country's largest, with approximately 1 million students, and has long been seen as deeply segregated along racial and socioeconomic lines. Close to 3/4 of Black and Latino students attend schools that have less than 10% white students, while more than a third of white students attend schools with majority white populations, according to data collected by the City Council. 2 years ago, Mayor Bill de Blasio attempted to eliminate the admissions exam for elite specialized high schools, but the state legislature, which has authority over the exam, rejected his proposal. In a statement, Danielle Filson, a spokeswoman for the city's education department, noted the de Blasio administration has recently made some changes, including using teacher evaluations rather than a standardized test to identify gifted 4-year-olds and temporarily suspending middle school admissions screens. This administration has taken bold, unprecedented steps to advance equity in our admissions policies, she said. Our persistent work to drive equity for New York City families is ongoing, and we will review this suit. The lawsuit, however, argued those moves do not go far enough to address the problem. At a news conference, de Blasio would not specifically comment on pending litigation. But he agreed that specialized high school admissions are broken and said the city needs a new system for its gifted and talented program. The plaintiffs include Integrate NYC, a youth-led nonprofit devoted to integrating the school system. In addition to admissions criteria, the lawsuit also faults the school system's curriculum, arguing that students of color learn that civilization is equated with whiteness and that history is taught from a Eurocentric point of view. While the school system is majority Black and Latino, most teachers and administrators are white, the lawsuit notes. U.S. government to ship 18.5 million doses of COVID vaccine this week, White House says. The White House said on Tuesday that the government will distribute around 18.5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines this week, fewer than last week because no new doses of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine are ready to be sent out. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said at a news briefing that the U.S. government plans to distribute 15.8 million doses of the Pfizer/BioNTech and Moderna vaccine to states, tribes and territories, along with 2.7 million doses going to pharmacies. Last week, the U.S. government distributed over 21 million doses of all three vaccines. That included over 3.5 million doses of the newly authorized Janj vaccine. Janj's manufacturing has been slower than expected, and the company was not expected to be able to deliver any doses of its vaccine this week. It is expected to resume shipments of the vaccine later in March. As of Tuesday morning, more than 123 million doses of the vaccines had been distributed in the United States and 93.7 million shots had been administered, according to data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Color-coded passage: why smugglers are tagging U.S.-bound migrants with wristbands. Panitas, Texas. Along the banks of the Rio Grande in the scrubby grassland near Panitas, Texas, hundreds of colored plastic wristbands ripped off by migrants litter the ground. Signs of what U.S. border officials say is a growing trend among powerful drug cartels and smugglers to track people paying to cross illegally into the United States. The plastic bands, red, blue, green, white, some labeled arrivals or entries in Spanish, are discarded after migrants cross the river on makeshift rafts, according to a Reuters witness. Their use has not been widely reported before. Some migrants are trying to evade border agents, others are mostly Central American families, or young children traveling without parents who turn themselves into officials, often to seek asylum. Border Patrol agents in the Rio Grande Valley sector, which spans more than 34,000 square miles, 88,000 square kilometers along the border in southeast Texas, have recently encountered immigrants wearing the bracelets during several apprehensions, said Matthew Diamond, a spokesman for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The information on the bracelets represents a multitude of data that is used by smuggling organizations, such as payment status or affiliation with smuggling groups, Diamond told Reuters. The differing smuggling techniques come as Democratic President Joe Biden's administration has sought to reverse restrictive immigration policies set up by his predecessor, former President Donald Trump. But a recent jump in border crossings has Republicans warning the easing of hardline policies will lead to an immigration crisis. U.S. border agents carried out nearly 100,000 apprehensions or rapid expulsions of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border in February, according to two people familiar with preliminary figures, the highest monthly total since mid-2019. Purple bracelet. The categorization system illustrates the sophistication of organized criminal groups ferrying people across the U.S.-Mexico border, said Teresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Washington-based Bipartisan Policy Center. They run it like a business, said Cardinal Brown, which means finding more patrons and looking for efficiencies. Migrants can pay thousands of dollars for the journey to the United States, and human smugglers have to pay off drug cartels to move people through parts of Mexico. This is a money-making operation and they have to pay close attention to who has paid, she said. This may be a new way to keep track. Criminal groups operating in northern Mexico, however, have long used systems to log which migrants have already paid for the right to be in gang-controlled territory, as well as for the right to cross the border into the United States, migration experts said. When increased numbers of Central American were arriving at the border on express buses in 2019, smugglers kept tabs on them by double-checking the names and IDs of migrants before they got off the bus to make sure they had paid, Cardinal Brown said. A migrant in Reynosa, one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico across the border from McAllen, Texas, who declined to give his name for fear of retaliation, showed Reuters a picture of a purple wristband he was wearing. He said he paid $500 to one of the criminal groups in the city after he arrived a few months ago from Honduras to secure the purple bracelet to protect against kidnapping or extortion. He said once migrants or their smugglers have paid for the right to cross the river, which is also controlled by criminal groups, they receive another bracelet. This way we're not in danger, neither us nor the coyote, he said, using the Spanish word for smuggler. One human smuggler who spoke on conditions of anonymity confirmed the bracelets were a system to designate who has paid for the right to transit through cartel territory. They are putting these bracelets on so there aren't killings by mistake, he said. Migrants and smugglers say the use of bracelets to designate who has paid for the right to cross the river is a system required by the cartels that control waterfront territory in the conflict-ridden state of Tamaulipas. In January, a group of migrants were massacred in Tamaulipas state, just 40 miles 70 kilometers west of Reynosa. 12 local Mexican police have been arrested in connection with the massacre. U.S. Supreme Court dismisses Trump immigration rule dispute. At the urging of President Joe Biden's administration, the U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday dismissed a dispute over the legality of one of former President Donald Trump's hardline immigration rules that barred immigrants deemed likely to require government benefits from obtaining legal permanent residency. Biden, who has criticized Trump's immigration approach, is widely expected to dump the policy known as the public charge rule. A coalition of immigrant rights groups that, along with New York, Connecticut and Vermont, had challenged the rule, said Tuesday's action clears the way for the policy, which they denounced as an illegal wealth test, to no longer be enforced. The justices on February 22 had agreed to hear an appeal filed by Trump's administration of a ruling by the Manhattan-based Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that the rule likely violated federal immigration and administrative law by impermissibly expanding the definition of who counts as a public charge and greatly increasing the number of people who would be rejected for residency. Two other cases involving the rule that had been pending before the High Court were also dismissed. Those challenging the rule agreed with Biden's administration that the litigation should be thrown out. The administration made the request earlier on Tuesday. Immigrant families can now access life-saving health care, food and housing assistance for which they are eligible without fear that they will lose the chance to obtain lawful permanent residence. Because the actions today mean that the harmful Trump public charge rule will again be blocked, the group said in a statement. Trump's hardline stance toward immigration was a hallmark of his presidency. Primarily at issue in the various challenges filed in federal courts across the country was which immigrants would be eligible for legal permanent residency, known as a green card. U.S. immigration law has long required officials to exclude people likely to become a public charge from permanent residency. U.S. guidelines in place for the past 2 decades had said immigrants likely to become primarily dependent on direct cash assistance or long-term institutionalization, in a nursing home for example, at public expense would be barred. Trump's policy expanded the public charge bar to anyone deemed likely to receive a much wider range of benefits for more than an aggregate of 12 months over any 36-month period, including the Medicaid healthcare program, housing and food assistance. In the New York case, a federal judge blocked the rule in 2019, and last August the Second Circuit upheld that decision. Separately, the Chicago-based 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals last June upheld an injunction against the rule there. The San Francisco-based 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in December upheld injunctions involving 18 Democratic-led states and the District of Columbia. Minneapolis court seats first 2 jurors in trial over George Floyd's fatal arrest. Minneapolis, a Minnesota judge began seating jurors on Tuesday in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis policeman facing murder and manslaughter charges for his role in the death of George Floyd during an arrest that caused an outcry around the world. Judge Peter Cahill of the Hennepin County District Court did so over the objections of state prosecutors, who say the trial should not begin until a higher court resolves how many criminal charges Chauvin should face. The prosecutors asked the Minnesota Court of Appeals on Monday, originally scheduled to be the first day of jury selection, to order Cahill to delay the trial, which has involved barricading parts of downtown Minneapolis for fear of civil unrest. There is no need for this kind of uncertainty in any case, let alone a case of this magnitude, the prosecutors from the Minnesota Attorney General's office wrote in their petition to the appeals court. It was not clear whether the higher court would intervene, and Cahill said he believed he had jurisdiction to proceed unless he was ordered otherwise. The court mailed prospective jurors an unusually detailed 16-page questionnaire last year asking them what they know about Floyd's death, and asking for their opinions on the Black Lives Matter movement. Cahill called in 6 potential jurors, who have been promised anonymity for the duration of the trial, asking them if they knew any of the parties involved. Chauvin, dressed in a light gray suit, a blue shirt, a dark tie and a black face mask, briefly stood when his lawyer introduced him to the panel. The judge and lawyers then sent out the group and called potential jurors in one at a time for questioning about possible biases. Chauvin's lawyers have up to 15 peremptory challenges by which they can exclude a juror without having to cite a reason, while the prosecutors have 9. The first potential juror conceded that she did not speak English well and wrote that she wanted to be on the jury because she would like to give her opinion on the unjust death of George Floyd. Chauvin's lawyers used up one of their peremptory challenges and she was dismissed. The clear plexiglass screens arranged around the court as a precaution against the novel coronavirus were then adjusted after Cahill realized potential jurors could be seen as a faint reflection on the video broadcast of proceedings. The second potential juror, who appeared to be white, described himself as a chemist working in an environmental testing laboratory who said he somewhat disagreed with the assertion that Minneapolis police generally use disproportionate force against black people. He said he supported the Black Lives Matter movement, saying he understood it to mean that all lives matter equally. Cahill told him soon after that he would be the first juror to be seated. Other potential jurors were excused as the day went on, but in the afternoon a woman who said she was super excited to receive the jury summons and considered it her civic duty to serve was told by the judge she would be on the jury. "Awesome," she replied. 3 weeks for jury selection. The trial is seen as a landmark case on police violence against black people in the United States, a country where police officers are almost never found to be criminally responsible for killing civilians, including in cases where the suspected crime is minor or the suspect is unarmed. A trial on charges of second-degree murder and manslaughter had been scheduled to begin on Monday. But the judge was stymied by an 11th-hour ruling by the Minnesota Court of Appeals on Friday that ordered him to reconsider the request by prosecutors to reinstate a third charge of third-degree murder. Lawyers for Chauvin, 44, asked the state Supreme Court on Monday to prevent the additional charge being applied. He was released from jail on a $1 million bond last October and is being tried in a courtroom in the Hennepin County Government Center, a tower in downtown Minneapolis now ringed with barbed wire fencing and concrete barricades for fear of disruption by protesters. Chauvin, who is white, and 3 other police officers were fired the day after the deadly arrest on May 25 on suspicion that Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, used a counterfeit $20 bill to buy cigarettes at the Cup Foods grocery store. The judge has set aside 3 weeks for jury selection alone, mindful of the difficulties finding impartial Minneapolitans in a case that has convulsed the nation. The image of the victim, a selfie of Floyd smiling faintly, has become an international icon of racial justice. Chauvin would face up to 40 years in prison if convicted on the most serious charge. His lawyers say he properly followed the training he was given by the Minneapolis Police Department. Trump vows no more money for Rhinos, instead encouraging donations to his PAC. Former President Trump encouraged donors to give money to his Save America PAC instead of to Republicans he dubbed Rhinos, in another departure from traditional GOP campaign operations. No more money for Rhinos, Trump said in a statement late Monday, referring to Republicans in name only. They do nothing but hurt the Republican Party and our great voting base. They will never lead us to greatness. The statement came days after Trump's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter to the Republican National Committee, RNC, the National Republican Senatorial Committee and the National Republican Congressional Committee to stop using his name and likeness for fundraising and merchandise sales. The three groups represent the largest fundraising bodies for the GOP. The RNC responded on Monday and said the fundraising arm has a right to use Trump's name and likeness in its efforts. RNC Chief Counsel Justin Reamer wrote in a letter that the party has every right to refer to public figures as it engages in core, First Amendment protected political speech, and it will continue to do so in pursuit of these common goals. The former president has also increased criticism of Republicans who voted to convict him of inciting an insurrection, promising to travel to Alaska to campaign against Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican Alaska, who voted to convict Trump in the Senate impeachment trial. Last week, Trump blasted the Wall Street Journal for its editorial calling for Republicans to move on from the former president. The newspaper's editorial highlighted the Republican Party's electoral losses under Trump, including the House in 2018 and the Senate this year. They fight for Rhinos that have so badly hurt the Republican Party, he said in a statement. That's where they are and that's where they will always be. Fortunately, nobody cares much about the Wall Street Journal editorial anymore. They have lost great credibility. The moves by Trump and his team come after he ruled out the possibility of starting his own political party during a speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference, where he also teased a potential 2024 presidential run. Royal family says it is saddened by claims in Meghan and Harry interview. Buckingham Palace is responding to Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex's bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey, saying the royal family is saddened by the challenges the couple faced, especially those regarding race. The whole family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan, Buckingham Palace said Tuesday in its first comments about the tell-all interview with the pair on CBS. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning, the statement added. The sit-down with Winfrey, which aired Sunday in the United States, sent shockwaves worldwide as the former Suits actress, who was born Meghan Markle, and Harry, the sixth in line to the British throne, opened up about their reasons for leaving the United Kingdom for California and stepping away from their duties as full-time working royals. The statement from Buckingham Palace left room to dispute some of the couple's accusations, saying, while some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. Harry, Meghan and Archie will always be much-loved family members, it added. During the 2-hour TV special, Meghan, whose mother is black and father is white, said that before her son with Harry was born in 2019, there were conversations within the royal family about how dark his skin might be. Harry later clarified that neither Queen Elizabeth II nor Prince Philip made the alleged comment. Meghan also described what she sees as a break with protocol that her son, Archie, didn't receive a royal title or security detail. She suggested that the child's race may have factored into the decision on his title. Meghan also recounted having suicidal thoughts amid intense media scrutiny following her 2018 marriage to Harry, saying the royal family didn't give her access to mental health resources. I just didn't want to be alive anymore, Meghan said. And that was a very clear and real and frightening constant thought. Last week, ahead of Oprah with Meghan and Harry's air date, Buckingham Palace announced that it was launching an investigation following accusations by a former aide that Meghan bullied staff. A spokesperson for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex called the bullying accusations, stemming from a complaint filed in 2018, an attack on her character in a statement to The Hill, saying she was saddened particularly as someone who has been the target of bullying herself and is deeply committed to supporting those who have experienced pain and trauma. Piers Morgan storms off Good Morning Britain after confrontation. Piers Morgan stormed off the set of Good Morning Britain on Tuesday after fellow presenter Alex Beresford, who is black, critiqued his remarks about the former Meghan Markle's and Prince Harry's interview with Oprah Winfrey. Beresford called Morgan's behavior diabolical after he walked off the show. Morgan walked off as Beresford appeared to be criticizing Morgan for aiming his critiques at Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, for her cutting off contact. After criticizing the negative press coverage of Meghan, Beresford said, "And I understand that you don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times on this program, a number of times. And I understand that you've got a personal relationship with Meghan Markle, or you had one. And she cut you off. She's entitled to cut you off, if she wants to," Beresford said. "Has she said anything about you since she cut you off?" "I don't think she has, yet you continue to trash her." "Okay, I'm done with this," Morgan interjected, as the camera showed him walking off stage. "Sorry," he said. "See you later. Can't do this." "This is absolutely diabolical behavior," Beresford then said. "I'm sorry, but Piers spots off on a regular basis and we all have to sit there and then listen. 6:30 to 7 o'clock yesterday was incredibly hard to watch." After the Oprah special aired on Sunday, Morgan called out Meghan on Twitter and television and called the interview destructive, self-serving nonsense that is an absolutely disgraceful betrayal of the Queen and the royal family. Beresford commented on the incident later on Twitter, saying he did not have the privilege to sit on the fence. Former Australian leader, Oprah interview strengthened argument to cut ties with monarchy. Former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said that Oprah Winfrey's interview with Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, strengthened the argument for cutting ties with the UK monarchy. "It's clearly an unhappy family, or at least Meghan and Harry are unhappy. It seems very sad," Turnbull told Australian Broadcasting Corporation, according to the Associated Press. Turnbull, who met with Harry and Meghan in 2018 before being replaced, added that after the end of the Queen's reign, that is the time for us to say, "Okay, we've passed that watershed. Do we really want to have whoever happens to be the King or Queen of the UK automatically our head of state?" Turnbull asked. The comments come as the United Kingdom and the rest of the world weigh in on the interview, which aired Sunday night on CBS News in the US. During the interview, Meghan admitted to having suicidal thoughts amid aggressive media scrutiny of the couple's marriage in 2018. She also said there were conversations about how dark their son Archie's skin color might be while she was pregnant. Australia is a member of the British Commonwealth and recognizes Queen Elizabeth II as its formal head of state, CBS News noted. While the UK does not formally rule over Australia, the two have maintained a close cooperation since Australia gained its independence. Turnbull has previously advocated for selecting an Australian citizen as head of state, according to CBS. China's Xi calls on military to be prepared amid unstable security situation. China President Xi Jinping says the military needs to be prepared amid an unstable security situation with other countries. "The current security situation of our country is largely unstable and uncertain," Xi said in a panel discussion during a legislative session, the South China Morning Post reported. "The entire military must coordinate the relationship between capacity building and combat readiness, be prepared to respond to a variety of complex and difficult situations at any time, resolutely safeguard national sovereignty, security and development interests, and provide strong support for the comprehensive construction of a modern socialist state," Xi added. Tensions have been rising between the US and China over Taiwan, the South China Sea and Hong Kong. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that President Biden needs to reverse former President Trump's policies regarding Taiwan and that the United States was playing with fire for backing an independent Taiwan government. China and India are also in a tense situation over territory at the border that both countries believe should be theirs. China's Defense Minister General Wei Feng has called for better military training as he says the country has entered a high-risk phase for national security, according to the South China Morning Post. "We are facing mounting tasks in national defense, and we must comprehensively improve military training and preparedness for battle so as to increase our strategic capabilities to prevail over our strong enemies," Wei said. These talks come after China announced they would increase their military budget by 6.8%, which would amount to $208 billion. The number could be higher as many experts don't believe China releases its full numbers for the military. Xi has said he wants a world-class military by 2050 and wants more innovative technology to be used. Second Myanmar official dies after arrest, junta steps up media crackdown. An official from deposed Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, NLD, died in custody after he was arrested early on Tuesday, the second party figure to die in detention in 2 days, as security forces broke up street protests against the military junta. Police also cracked down on independent media, raiding the offices of 2 news outlets and detaining 2 journalists. Myanmar has been in crisis since the army ousted Suu Kyi's elected government in a coup on February 1, detained her and other NLD officials, and set up a ruling junta of generals. The NLD's Zha Myat Lin died in custody on Tuesday after he was arrested in the country's main city of Yangon around 1:30 a.m., said Ba Myo Thine, a member of the dissolved Upper House of Parliament. He's been participating continuously in the protests, Ba Myo Thine said. The cause of death was not clear. In a Facebook Live broadcast before he was detained, Zha Myat Lin urged people to continue fighting the army, even if it costs our lives. Their power must never last, he said. Neither the military nor the police responded to calls for comment. Zha Myat Lin is the second NLD official to have died in custody in the last 2 days. Kin Mong Lot, who had worked as a campaign manager for an NLD MP elected in 2020, died after he was arrested on Saturday night. More than 1,900 people have been arrested across the country since the coup, the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners said. Police broke up scattered demonstrations in Yangon, former capital and still the commercial hub, and other towns across Myanmar with tear gas and stun grenades on Tuesday. As night fell, soldiers fired weapons in different districts of the coastal town of Dawei, while at least 2 people were wounded earlier in the day, one by a gunshot, in the town of Monyan in the north, local media said. Witnesses said 2 journalists from Kamiyut, an independent media company, were arrested, while the military raided the offices of Mizima News in Yangon. Live footage posted to social media also showed a raid after nightfall in the offices of the Democratic Voice of Burma, DVB. A day earlier, the junta stripped Mizima, DVB, and 3 other outlets of their licenses. They had all been active in covering protests against the coup. At least 35 journalists have been arrested since the February 1 coup, Myanmar now reported, of which 19 have been released. The U.S. State Department said it strongly condemned the junta for the violent crackdowns on those peacefully taking to the streets and on those who are just doing their jobs, including independent journalists who have been swept up. Daily protests against the coup are being staged across the country and security forces have cracked down harshly. More than 60 protesters have been killed and more than 1,800 detained, the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, AAPP, an advocacy group, has said. Caught in a trap. Overnight, police arrested about 50 people who had been cornered by security forces in a district of Yangon, a rights group said. But hundreds managed to escape the encirclement after crowds of demonstrators rallied in their support in defiance of a nighttime curfew. Western powers and the United Nations had called on the military to allow the youths to leave the area in safety. Activist Sharya Mona said she had been in a building with about 15 to 20 others, but was able to get home after people gave her free car rides and welcomed protesters. She said she would keep demonstrating until the dictatorship ends. The army has justified the coup by saying that a November election won by the NLD was marred by fraud, a claim rejected by the Electoral Commission. It has promised a new election, but has not said when that might be held. International powers have condemned the takeover, which derailed a slow transition to democracy in a country that has been ruled by the military for long periods since independence from Britain in 1947. The junta said on Tuesday it was recalling its ambassador to Britain a day after he urged them in a statement to release Suu Kyi, state media reported. The MRTV news channel said Cho Swar Min, one of several ambassadors to publicly break from the military line, had released the statement without following orders. The military has brushed off condemnation of its actions, as it has in past periods of army rule when outbreaks of protest were bloodily repressed. It is also under pressure from a civil disobedience movement that has crippled government business and from strikes at banks, factories and shops that have shut much of Yangon this week. The European Union is preparing to widen its sanctions to target army-run businesses, according to diplomats and 2 internal documents seen by Reuters. U.S. Admiral calls for ground-based offensive weaponry in Western Pacific. Washington, the United States military needs more long-range weaponry in the Western Pacific, including ground-based arms, the top U.S. Admiral for the Asia-Pacific said on Tuesday, underscoring U.S. concerns about China's growing military strength, particularly among its missile forces. President Joe Biden's administration has said the United States intends to compete with China's growing influence and military strength in the Asia-Pacific. The Pentagon is carrying out a review of its strategy in the region. A wider base of long-range precision fires, which are enabled by all our terrestrial forces, not just sea and air but by land forces as well, is critically important to stabilize what is becoming a more unstable environment in the Western Pacific, Admiral Phil Davidson, commander for U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, told a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Davidson cited enthusiasm by the Army and Marine Corps to embrace some of the capabilities that the Navy and Air Force have already developed. A budget document provided to Congress last month by the Indo-Pacific Command said the United States needed increased ground-based weapons along the first island chain, which would cost $408 million in fiscal year 2022 alone and $2.9 billion from fiscal years 2023 to 2027. The first island chain is the string of islands that run from the Japanese archipelago through Taiwan, the Philippines and onto Borneo, enclosing China's coastal seas. While the United States has been able to use long-range weapons on ships and aircraft, there were limits placed on it because of an arms control treaty. But the United States pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, INF, treaty with Russia in 2019. While the Pentagon has said it was in favor of placing such missiles in the region, allies in Asia have so far appeared to be opposed to the idea of hosting them. Davidson said, however, that missile defense was not enough to deter a potential adversary. Missile defense is the hardest thing to do. And if I'm the manager of a baseball team, if I can have the best defenses in the world, but if I can't score some runs, I can't win the game, Davidson said. Analysis: Lula's revival suits Bolsonaro, but Brazil 2022 is a different match. Brasilia: Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva first ran for president in 1989. 3 decades later, the gravelly-voiced former union leader looks set for one more run at Brazil's top job after a Supreme Court judge quashed his convictions and restored his political rights. His resurrection from the political ashes sets the stage for a déjà vu election next year, pitting him against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro and giving voters a choice between the most polarizing figures on Brazil's political spectrum. This changes the whole picture, said Criomar de Souza, founder of Dharma Political Risk and Strategy in Brasilia. It's obviously still very early, but this strangles any momentum for a more moderate centrist candidate. That should suit Bolsonaro just fine. The former army captain won in 2018 with vows to expunge the leftist legacy of Lula's Workers' Party, which led Latin America's largest economy from 2003 to 2016. Bolsonaro's rhetoric was simple, angry, and very effective. The left was rushing Brazil on a one-way street to the same ruin as Venezuela, he warned. Politics in the capital Brasilia was rotten to the core. The country needed an unvarnished right-wing outsider like himself, with no links to major political parties. But as former U.S. President Donald Trump's failed re-election effort showed, it is harder to win on a drain the swamp platform when you spent 4 years in charge of the swamp. Brazil is hurting, with 250,000 lost to COVID-19, an economy in worse shape than when Bolsonaro took over and anti-corruption operations dismantled. It is not clear if popular anger towards the Workers' Party remains what it was in 2018. Even as he will leap at the chance to rail against the left's past mistakes, Bolsonaro cannot escape being judged on his own performance. Bolsonaro today doesn't have much to show for his presidency, said Leonardo Barreto, director at political consultancy Vector in Brasilia. The government has to show results to keep Bolsonaro in power. This is more important than the presence or absence of Lula in the presidential race. For Barreto and many other political analysts, that means Bolsonaro may pursue an increasingly populist agenda to shore up support. Promises of economic reforms, which won Bolsonaro supporters from the financial community, will be shelved. Financial markets reacted to the prospect of a further populist shift. Brazil's real, already the world's worst-performing currency against the dollar this year after the Libyan dinar and Sudanese pound, slumped to within 10 cents of its all-time low in May last year. There is also the question of which Lula decides to run. His remarkable longevity is a testament to a knack for reinvention. Will 2022 see a return of the leftist firebrand, who made his name stumping on factory floors in the 1980s, or the deal-making unifier that swapped blood-red t-shirts for tailored suits as he calmed markets after a landslide victory in 2002? It is too soon for firm conclusions, but voter surveys suggest Lula has a good shot, currently polling ahead of Bolsonaro. Speaking to Reuters in September, Lula joked that he had the energy of a 30-year-old and the political drive of a 20-year-old. It is, however, the shrewd experience of a 75-year-old lifetime politician that Bolsonaro should be most wary of. It's a different game from 2018, said Carlos Melo, a politics professor at the INSPIR Institute in Sao Paulo. We'll have to see which way Lula goes. Russia's Sputnik V could be made in European Union after reported deals. Moscow: Russia's Sputnik V vaccine against COVID-19 could be produced in Western Europe after a deal to make it in Italy was signed by Moscow's Rdeef Sovereign Wealth Fund and Swiss-based pharmaceutical company Adyen. The agreement, which will need approval from Italian regulators before production can be launched, has been confirmed by both Rdeef, which markets Sputnik V internationally, and the Italian-Russian Chamber of Commerce. Kirill Dmitriev, Rdeef's head, told Russian state TV his fund had also struck deals with production facilities in Spain, France and Germany to produce Sputnik. He did not provide details. It is the latest indication that some companies could press ahead with plans without waiting for the European Union's regulator, the European Medicines Agency, EMA, to grant its approval to Sputnik V. Scientists said the Russian vaccine was almost 92% effective, based on peer-reviewed late-stage trial results published in the Lancet Medical Journal last month. Sputnik V has already been approved or is being assessed for approval in 3 EU member states, Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. EU officials have said Brussels could start negotiations about a possible agreement to buy vaccines if at least 4 members request it. Italian breakthrough. The Italian-Russian Chamber of Commerce said on Monday that the Italian move paved the way for the creation of the first Sputnik V production facility in Europe outside Russia. It said there were plans for Italian production to begin in June and that it hoped that 10 million doses of Sputnik V could be produced there by the end of the year. This agreement is the first of its kind with a European partner, Vincenzo Trani, head of the chamber, said in the statement. It can be called a historic event, which is proof of the good state of relations between our countries and shows that Italian companies can see beyond political differences. The Lugano-based Adyen Pharma and Biotech did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Radif declined to provide further detail on the deal beyond confirming it. The Italian Industry Ministry has played no role in the deal between Radif and Adyen, a government source said, adding the ministry had not even been informed of the operation, which is legitimate and in line with market dynamics. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the Italy-related plan could help quickly satisfy demand for the shot abroad. An EMA official urged EU members last week to refrain from approving Sputnik V at the national level while the agency was still reviewing it, prompting the vaccine's developers to demand a public apology. Peskov called the EMA official's comment inappropriate at the very least. A spokesman for Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi said Rome was not applying particular pressure on the EU to secure the approval of Sputnik V. He said Draghi had urged the bloc to pursue all possible options to secure vaccines approved by the EMA. Don't forget to comment below with your common sense and subscribe to your podcast. This helps bring the podcast to life and grow it. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We can't wait to continue this adventure with you. Support us on PayPal. Thank you very much and enjoy listening.